Okay, so 13.5. ऋषिभिर् बहुधा गीतं छन्दोभिर्विविधैः पृथक् ब्रह्मसूत्रपदैश्चैव हेतुमद्भिर्विनिश्चितैः. That knowledge of the field of activities and knower of activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings. It is especially presented in Vedanta Sutra with all reasoning as to cause and effect. With all reasoning as to cause and effect, which means um, that everything, modern thinking doesn't try to, we call it root cause analysis, but we don't really get to the root cause. So here, it is a cause and effect, understanding both. It means that if you do this, what happens? If you do that, what happens? In that sense. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the highest authority in explaining this knowledge. Still, as a matter of course, learned scholars and standard authorities always give evidence from previous authorities. Krishna is explaining this most controversial point regarding the duality and non-duality of the soul and the super soul by referring to a scripture, the Vedanta, which is accepted as authority. First he says, this is according to different sages. As far as the sages are concerned, besides himself, who is also a sage, Vyasadeva is a great sage, and in the Vedanta Sutra, duality is perfectly explained. And Vyasadeva's father, Parashara, is also a great sage, and he writes in his books of religiosity, Aham Tvam Cha Tathanye, we, that is, you, I, and various other living entities are all transcendental, although in material bodies. Now we are fallen into the ways of three modes of material nature according to our different karma. As such, some are on higher levels and some are in the lower nature. The higher and lower natures exist due to ignorance and are being manifested in an infinite number of living entities. But the super soul, which is infallible, is uncontaminated by the three qualities of nature and is transcendental. Similarly, in the original Vedas, a distinction between soul, super soul, and body is made, especially in the Kathopanishad. There are many great sages who have explained this, and Parashara is considered principal among them. So, Krishna is also taking the standard route of referring to authorities. I mean, he says that by various sages, this has been described by various sages, so you don't have to believe just on what I am saying. Because various sages are authorities. So in here, Prabhupada is quoting that Vyasadeva and Parashara, both are great sages, and both of them have quoted in their works about duality of soul and super soul. Duality means that there is a soul and super soul. They are different. There are two of them, not one. And then Prabhupada also says that even Vedas, and the Kathopanishad also talks about this. The word Chandobhi refers to the various Vedic literatures. The Taittiriya Upanishad, for example, which is a branch of the Yajur Veda, describes nature, the living entity, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in each of the Vedas, there are 4 parts, and the last part is Upanishad. So each Veda has its own Upanishads. As stated before, Kshetra is the field of activities, and there are 2 kinds of Kshetragna, individual living entity and the supreme living entity. As stated in Taittiriya Upanishad, Brahma Pucham Pratishta. So here, this is all, now there are 5 different energies manifested in different levels. So first is Annamaya, dependence upon food for existence. This is a materialistic realization of Supreme. So there are different levels of realization. So Annamaya is the lowest. So this is materialistic realization. Then Pranamaya, after realizing that Supreme Truth is in food, one can realize Supreme Truth in living symptoms or life forms. So which means that, one cannot exist without food, so Lord is present in food. One cannot exist without prana, so Lord is present in prana. So like that, realizing Lord at different levels. Gnanamaya realization expands beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling and willing. So prana is not enough. Beyond prana, there is ability of thinking, feeling and willing. So that is gnana. Then there is Brahman realization. So then the fourth is Brahman. So these three, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Gnanamaya, these are all material, because Anna, food, Prana is life air, which is also material, and then Gnana, mind, basically. Then there is Vijnanamaya. So Brahman, which means that as Atma, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity itself. So Vijnanamaya comes to the platform of the Jiva. The next and supreme stage is Anandamaya realization, the all blissful nature. Thus, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization, which are called Brahmapucham. Out of these, first 3 involve the fields of activities and the living entities. Transcendental to all these fields of activities is the Supreme Lord, who is Anandamaya. The Vedanta Sutra also describes the Supreme by saying Anandamaya Bhyasat. The Supreme Personal Godhead is by nature full of joy. To enjoy his transcendental bliss, he expands into Vijnana, Prana, Vijnana, and Annamaya. So all the others are for his pleasure. In the field of activities, the living entity is considered to be the enjoyer, and the different from him is the Anandamaya. So Vijnanamaya is Jiva, Anandamaya is Supreme Lord. That means that if the living entity decides to enjoy in dovetailing himself with Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. Dovetailing himself means that our source of enjoyment should be the source of enjoyment for the Lord, which means engaging in whatever gives pleasure to the Lord. That is called dovetailing. So if he decides to enjoy in dovetailing himself, then he becomes perfect. But otherwise, the jivas are trying to enjoy independent, so they are not perfect. When they try to enjoy in line with the Lord, then they become perfect. This is a real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field, living entity as the supreme subordinate knower, and the nature of the field of activities. One has to search for this truth in the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra. It is mentioned here that the codes of the Brahma Sutra are very nicely arranged according to cause and effect. Some of the sutras are Navyad Ashrute, Natma Ashrute, Paratu Chatrute. The first aphorism indicates the field of activities. Second indicates living entity. Third indicates Supreme Lord, Samam Born. Okay, so this we want to understand. Okay, so basically, Krishna is just explaining, saying that, okay, there is soul and super soul. This has also been explained by other various sages, and it's also there in the Vedanta Sutra. Mahabhutani ahankaro buddhirsavyaktameva cha indriyani dasaikam cha panchachendriya gochara ichcha dvesha sukham dukkham sangatas-chetana dhritihi etat chetnam samasena savikaram udahratam. The 5 great elements, false ego, intelligence, unmanifested, senses, and mind. 5 great elements, Panchamahabhuta, false ego, ahankara, intelligence, buddhi, unmanifested abhyakta, the 10 senses, indriyani, dasha ekam, 11, 10, and the mind. Then pancha indriya gocharaha, 5 senses, sense objects, ichcha, dvesha, sukha, dukkha, sangataha means aggregate, chetana, living symptoms, ritihi, convictions. All these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interactions. So till here is the field of activities. Great elements, false ego, intelligence, unmanifested, 10 senses and mind, 5 sense objects. These are field of activities. Then from here, desire, hatred on are its interactions. Interactions means we desire, we hate when 2 field of activities interact. From all the authoritative statements of the great sages, the Vedic hymns and the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra, the components of this world can be understood as follows. First, there is Panchamahabhuta, earth, water, fire, air, ether. Then there is false ego, intelligence, unmanifested stage. Unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of nature. So this is Pradhana. Then there are 5 senses of our acquiring knowledge, 5 working senses. Then above that there is the mind, which can be called as a sense within. So there are 5 objects of senses: smell, taste, form, touch, sound. aggregate of these 24 elements is called the field of activity. These are 24 elements from here to here. If one makes an analytical study of these 24 subjects, then he can very well understand the field of activity. Then there are desire, hatred, happiness, and distress, which are interactions, representation of the 5 great elements in the gross body. So these are interactions. The living symptoms represented by consciousness, convictions are the manifestation of the subtle body, mind, ego, intelligence. So convictions are a manifestation of subtle body. These subtle elements are included within the field of activities. Oh, okay. So here, these are field of activities, subtle, living symptom represented by conscious, and convictions are the manifestations of subtle body. So these are subtle elements. Desire, hatred, happiness, and distress are interactions. Then the other 24 is the, so this also it is saying field of activity. Okay, so 5. Oh, no. Okay, 5, 6, 7, 8 plus 5, 13, 13 plus 5, 18, 18 plus 1, 19, 19 plus 5, 24. Okay, it's not clear. So life symptoms and convictions. These subtle elements are included. So I'm not sure what these, whether subtle elements are referring to mind, ego, intelligence, or subtle elements are referring to living symptoms and convictions. Okay. 5 great elements are gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, technically called tamasa buddhi, intelligence in ignorance. Okay. These things are like too technical. False ego, gross representation of false ego, which means false ego is subtle. How is false ego expressed? Through the 5 great elements, meaning if the 5 great elements are not there, then material creation cannot happen. So in some sense they are representation of false ego. False ego represents the primal stage of false ego. Primal stage of false ego means this false ego is not real ego. This is tamasa buddhi. The false ego is tamasa buddhi. Further represents the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of material nature. Unmanifested modes of material nature are called pradhan. Further represents the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes. Okay, this also I'm not very sure. Unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of material nature. Okay, so it's saying that this represents pradhana. So there is pradhana, then from pradhana then comes mahat tattva. So Prabhupada is saying here this tamasa buddhi represents pradhana, because pradhana is the unmanifested. First thing that comes out is false ego, that I am separate from Krishna. So maybe that way he is saying. One who desires to know the 24 elements in detail along with their interactions to study the philosophy in more detail, in Bhagavad Gita, summary only is given. The body is the representation of all these factors, and there are changes of the body which are 6 in number, which we all know. Therefore, the field is a non-permanent material. However, the Kshetragna is different. So here, I mean, what is important is for us to understand what are the components of the Kshetra. And its interactions. A lot of, I mean, this whole creation piece is like extremely complex. Maybe, I mean, I've read it multiple times, but I don't completely understand it. So maybe when we try to study Bhagavatam, we can see if we can jointly understand this. Also, this language is very somewhat archaic, as in, unless you know the Sanskrit or the philosophy behind, we cannot very easily make sense from the English. So we do some more study. So this part I didn't understand. So 2 things I didn't understand here. The subtle elements, which are what subtle elements is Prabhupada referring to? And some of this representation business, this whole paragraph not very clear. If anybody has more insights, you can kindly share. Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay, this is important. Amanitvam madam vitvam ahimsa kshantirajvam acharyopasanam shaucham stairyam atma vinigraha indriyartheshu vairagyam anankara evacha janma mrityuchara vyadi dukkhadoshanu darshanam asaktirana viswanga puttradharagrahadishu nityam cha samachittatvam ishtanishtopapatishu mayi chananya yogena bhaktirapya vicharini viviktadesha sevitam सेवित्वम् रतिर्जनसंसदि अध्यात्मज्ञाननित्यत्वम् तत्त्वज्ञानार्थदर्शनम् एतज्ज्ञानम् इति प्रोक्तम् ज्ञानं यत् अतोऽन्यथा. So these are all called knowledge, meaning knowledge in Vedic language also means application of the knowledge, not just theoretical. So humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, perception of evil of birth, death, old age, disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So this whole world is behind ignorance, because nobody in this world is actually learning about these things. Where is economic development, creation of wealth, all these things, which is what people are behind. So all of that is ajnana. So that is tamasa buddhi. The whole world is behind ajnana. So we should actually focus on these topics. So there are, I think, 26 qualities. At least 26. Anyway, we'll know when we read the purport. Okay, this process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. Meaning, field of activity is given in the last verse: desire, hatred, happiness, whatever. But some people think that humility is also an interaction. Humility, because it happens between two people. But this is not an interaction. So this is all just technical stuff. So this is process of knowledge. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. The embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is casing made of 24 elements, and the process of knowledge is a means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important is described in the first line of the 11th verse. Mayi chananya yogena bhaktir yogena bhaktir apyavicharini. Process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotion service to the Lord. So if one does not approach or is not able to approach transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. So 20 items overall. But if one takes the devotional service, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavatya kinchana sarvair gunes tattva samasate suraha. So all good qualities develop in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. So stage of devotional service means pure devotional service. The principle of accepting a spiritual master is essential. Even for one who takes to devotional service, it is most important. Transcendental life begins when one accepts Guru, Supreme Personality of Godhead, clearly states here that the process of knowledge is the actual path anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. As for the knowledge outlined here, the times may be analyzed as follows. Okay, what is humility? Means one should not be anxious to have satisfaction of being honored by others. Humility. This is another definition of humility. There are multiple definitions of humility. So one is not being anxious for being honored by others. Material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor. But from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge, who knows that he is not the body, anything honor or dishonor pertaining to the body is useless. So humility means not being anxious for this honor. One should not be hankering after this material deception. People are very anxious to be famous. For their religion, and consequently sometimes it is found that without understanding principles of religion, one enters into some group. It is not actually following religious principles and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor. And this is so common. So many people belong to so many religious groups. They think that they're following religion, but they don't know what is religion. And then they portray themselves as religious leaders, and people get cheated by them. As for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge by these items. So this is very important. Please note this. So if somebody wants to understand how much progress they are making in spiritual life, then they have to judge by these items, all these items. Non-violence generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body, but actually non-violence means not to put others into distress. People in general are taught by ignorance in the material concept of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing non-violence. So non-violence means giving transcendental knowledge. One should try his best to distribute real knowledge to the people, so they may become enlightened and leave this material entanglement. That is non-violence. Means that we have to engage in preaching or support activities of preaching, etc. Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. This is tolerance. If one is engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. We have experienced this. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. Even a boy like Prahlada, who was only 5 years old, was engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge. He was endangered when his father became antagonist to his devotion. The father tried to kill him so many ways, but Prahlada tolerated him. So there may be many impediments to making advancement in spiritual knowledge, but we should be tolerant and continue our progress with determination. This is very, very important. Simplicity means that without duplicity, one should be so straightforward that he can disclose the real truth even to an enemy. Straightforward, being straightforward. As for acceptance of spiritual master, that is essential because without instruction of Guru, one cannot make progress in spiritual science. One cannot approach Guru with one should approach Guru with all humility and offer him all services so that he'll be pleased to bestow his blessings upon the disciple. Because the Guru is a representative of Krishna. Yasya prasadat Bhagavad prasadat. If he bestows any blessings, that will make the disciple immediately advance without the disciples following regulative principles, or regulative principles will be easier for one who has served the spiritual master without reservation. Cleanliness is in external and internal. Taking bath, internal cleanliness is chanting Hare Krishna. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. Steadiness means that one should be very determined to make progress. Without such determination, one cannot make tangible progress. So determination is very important. Self-control means that one should not accept anything which is detrimental. Pratikulyasya varjanam, anukulyasya sankalpaha. That is self-control. Accepting what is favorable, rejecting what is not favorable. One should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. This is real renunciation. The senses are so strong that they are always anxious to have sense gratification. One should not cater to these demands, which are not necessary. These are demands, these are not needs. So they are not necessary. Senses should only be gratified to keep the body fit so that one can discharge his duty in spiritual life. Most important and uncontrollable sense is the tongue. If one can control the tongue, then there is every possibility of controlling the other senses. The function of the tongue is to taste and to vibrate. Therefore, by systematic regulation, tongue should always be engaged in tasting, remnants of foodstuffs, and chanting Hare Krishna. As far as eyes are concerned, they should not be allowed to see anything but the beautiful form of Krishna. That will control the eyes. Similarly, the ear should be engaged in hearing about Krishna, and nose is smelling the flowers offered to Krishna. This process of devotional service, and it is understood here that Bhagavad Gita is simply expounding the science of devotional service. Devotional service is the main and sole objective of Bhagavad Gita. Unintelligent commentators try to divert the mind of the reader to other subjects, but there is no other subject than devotional service in Bhagavad Gita. False ego means accepting this body as oneself. When one understands that he is not his body and his spirit soul, he comes to his real ego. Ego is there. False ego is condemned, but not real ego. In the Vedic literature, it is said, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am spirit. This I am, the sense of self, also exists in the liberated stage. That means that we don't merge, we don't lose our identity. The sense of I am is ego, but when the sense of I am is applied to the false body, it is false ego. When it applied to the sense of self is applied to reality, that is real ego. There are some philosophers who say we should give up our ego, but we cannot give up our ego because ego means identity. We ought, of course, to give up the false identification with the body. One should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age, disease. There are descriptions in Vedic literatures of birth, Bhagavatam, the world of the unborn, the child stay in the womb of the mother, its suffering, etc. are very graphically described. It should be thoroughly understood that birth is distressful because we forget how much distress we have suffered within the womb of the mother. We do not make any solution to the repetition of birth and death. If we remember, then we will know, oh my God, it's so painful. Why should I undergo it again? So that is why we have to hear. When we hear from Srimad Bhagavatam, then we'll be able to understand, oh, it is so painful. So I should not get into this again. Similarly, at the time of death, there are all kinds of sufferings and they're all mentioned in authoritative scriptures. These should be discussed. And as far as disease and old age, everyone gets practical experience. No one wants to be diseased. No one wants to become old. But there is no avoiding these. Unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, pessimistic, not positive. In the material world, people say have a positive outlook. But Prabhupada is saying you should have a negative outlook of material life. Considering the distresses of birth, death, old age, disease, there's no impetus for our making advancement. So if we are not having a negative view of life, material life, then it's, okay, this is nice. So let me just continue here. Prabhupada is saying, no, you should have a negative view of material life so that you can focus on spiritual life. As for detachment from children, wife, home, it is not meant that one should have no feeling for this. They are natural objects of affection, but when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. Best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy. So this also refers to our own positions. If we are in full Krishna consciousness, we can make home very happy. But since we are only not fully Krishna conscious, then we cannot make the others happy. Because the process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. One need only chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra, accept remnants of foodstuff offered to Krishna, have some discussion on books like Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, engage oneself in deity worship. These 4 things will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down during morning and evening and chant together Hare Krishna. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness, follow these 4 principles, then there's no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from happiness and distress because in this world, one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. So whatever it is, you can just be detached and not get too bothered by it. Happiness and distress are concomitant factors, meaning they are always together. One should learn to tolerate. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress. So one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised. Now, we can't avoid happiness and distress because we've done karma in the past. So it will come. So we have to try to be automatically equipoised. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are happy. When we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But we are actually in the spiritual position. Then these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 process of devotional service, as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter. This process should be followed. But here it is unbreakable, meaning nothing can stop us, like that kind of devotional service. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not mix with materialist men. He should not mix. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. So again, one more test. So do we want to live with people? What kind of people? That also decides. That will also tell us. Naturally, devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema going or enjoying some social function because he understands these are simply waste of time. So if you have not reached this stage, then again we know we have to make progress. There are many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subject, but according to Bhagavad Gita, such research and philosophical speculation has no value. It is more or less nonsensical. According to Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self that is recommended. As far as self-realization concerned, it is clearly stated that Bhakti Yoga is especially practical. As soon as there is question of devotion, one must consider relationship between super soul and individual soul. The individual soul and super soul cannot be one, at least not in bhakti. This service of the individual soul to the supreme soul is eternal, nityam, and it is clearly stated. So bhakti is eternal. One should be established in that philosophical conviction. In the Bhagavatam, it is explained, Vadanti tattva vidas tattvam jnanam advayam. So, absolute truth can be realized in 3 phases, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the last word in realization of absolute truth. Therefore, one should reach up to the platform of understanding Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus engage in devotional service of the Lord. That is the perfection of knowledge. Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization, the absolute truth, this process is just like a staircase, beginning from the ground floor going up to the top floor. Now on the staircase, there are so many people who have reached the first floor, second floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement, he will be frustrated. So this is very important. One wants to compete with God. Compete with God means we want to become enjoyers. At the same time, we want to make advancement. That is not possible. He will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is not truly possible. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Although the living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, he still thinks I am God because of ignorance. We are small gods. We don't think that I am Krishna, Krishna God. We think we are small, minor Krishnas, mini Krishnas. The beginning of knowledge, therefore, is amanitva, humility. Humility means that I am not God, I am servant of God. That is the beginning. One should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. So this whole thing starts here with humility. So we should study these qualities, these aspects of knowledge, and think where we stand. And of course, all these qualities will develop automatically if we engage in unbreakable devotional service. If you're not able to engage in unbreakable devotional service, then we should still make efforts to develop some of these qualities, at least, which are or engage fully in devotional service, unbreakable devotional service. Yeah, so this is very, very important. You have to meditate on these various aspects of this knowledge. Okay, so we'll stop here. Any questions? All these actually, these last 5 chapters will be like this. Some of them are, especially when we come to the discussion about the modes, nothing much will be there to explain. So anyway, if anybody has any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we'll stop. Okay, no questions. Okay, then we'll stop there.